This is a Media Lab podcast.
Oh God, Kyle, what's going on here?
What? I'm training the machine. It's thinking it's going to become the first machine boxer.
Haven't I told you something about not being the punching bag?
Welcome to my life, Dave.
Those are some spindly arms, man. What kind of arms does the machine have arms now? That's pretty frightening.
You know, it's weird. It really wanted me to attach them. So basically, imagine in your mind the little Rock'em Sock'em robots. It's that, but just plaster of Paris. That's all I had at my house is plaster of Paris.
I'll have to put up a picture somehow. Somewhere.
Yeah, it's. I mean, if you could, whatever is in your mind, it's better than probably what the reality looks like.
In his own garage, Kyle has built a machine, cobbled together with parts found in his friend's church basement and a dumpster behind the local Dairy Queen. This monstrosity is now alive and evil. Kyle has convinced his friend Dave to help stop the apocalypse by reviewing films the machine picks. The ultimate purpose is still unknown, and Kyle could have probably done this himself, but he's not being dragged to hell alone. This is Kyle and Dave versus the machine.
Welcome to Kyle and Dave versus the Machine. My name is Kyle.
And my name is Dave.
And I'm the machine.
A podcast where a sentient machine forces us to watch movies in order to prevent it from initiating the apocalypse. Although we do tend to talk about the ideas of the movie rather than the movie itself. Today, we're going to be watching the film, The Hurricane.
Carter is the slave name that was given to my forefathers and was passed on to me. Hurricane is the professional name that I acquired later on in life.
Hurricane Carter has defeated the wonder.
One thing I could do and the only thing was box.
Can you believe that black punk? He thinks he's champion of the world.
We're looking for two Negroes in a white car.
Any two will do.
Look carefully, sir. Are these the two men who shot you?
He said no.
Take another look, sir.
Reuben Carter, you are sentenced to be imprisoned for the remainder of your natural life.
I'm innocent.
So Dave, do you have any history with this movie whatsoever?
I don't know. I do
or
know.
Or maybe even the story of Reuben Carter.
No, I mean, I do know it's a Denzel piece. I cannot concretely say I've watched this before. It's just another one of those movies where I know of it. I know it's supposed to be one of the good ones, but I can't say for certain I've seen it before. And I don't know much. I have not researched Reuben Carter.
Try for the rest of this podcast not to say Reuben Steddard, because I have made that mistake now a dozen or so times this week when I've told people I've been watching the movie, The Hurricane. So you're going to be telling very clearly that I am a white person, because I'll tell you, I was the same way. I didn't know much about this story. I was watching the Oscars. I started watching the Oscars in 97 and now have not missed a year since then because I'm a masochist. So I remember them talking about the story and Reuben Carter being in the audience at that year's Oscars. But honestly, the biggest reference point I have to this story is the Bob Dylan song, which is 8 or 9 minutes long and kind of tells you literally the whole story of Reuben Carter, who was still in jail at the point when Dylan made that song in 1970-something, whenever that song came out. So I know the Dylan song quite well and have never seen this movie in my entire life.
It also points to how white you are, that you can understand what Bob Dylan is saying when he sings.
You racist. Yes, I do. I'm one of the weirdos who actually likes Bob Dylan's voice. So that says a lot about me, unfortunately.
It really does.
So let's do this. Let's go maybe find out a little bit more about Reuben Carter then in film form. It's 3 hours long, Dave.
Well, I can't lie that I have something better to do. So let's do this.
You only have a family, so screw that. Let's go watch a 3-hour movie.
It's all about priorities.
Let's go watch this movie. I'll go thank some sponsors. David's going to go and cough his lungs out. And when then we return, we'll be talking about The Hurricane.
It's not Corona.
I love, okay, first of all, love it when people tell me that. Like, I know. It's not Corona. I'm telling you it's not Corona. Thanks. I've been dealing with a lot of entitled people today, Dave. So
were you at?
I was at
Do you guys wear a face mask?
All day long. I was
Fucking
wearing
sweet.
it for 7 hours.
Perfect.
And then guy wants to come into the store. I'm like, great, you can, we have this lineup over here. And he's like, well, I need to go in right now. I'm like, great, there's a lineup over here. He's like, yeah, but I just want to buy this computer. I just want to give you the cash and go. I'm like, great, there's a lineup over here. And he's like, fine, I'll go buy it at Best Buy. I'm like, great, have a great day. I don't know what you want me to say.
Well, you know what you could have told him was that there's a lineup over here. I mean, I don't think you got it.
Maybe you didn't get it the first 3 times. I told him.
Humans.
Hi there, everyone. It's just Kyle here again, letting you know about some of the people and businesses that make this show continue to run. The heat wave seems to be over, but a deep tissue tiredness seems to be invading my very soul. And so I'm recording this in a waking life stupor. So let's talk about some sponsors. Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is brought to you by Park Power, a provider of electricity and natural gas in Alberta that offers low rates, awesome service, and profit sharing with local charities. Park Power is owned by Chris Kozowski, who has a growing and well-deserved reputation for being a guy who cares. If you're in the Edmonton area, you may have seen him around town in his signature bow tie, supporting local causes and boosting local business. He walks the talk with his business. It's why Park Power shares its profits with local charities. As a new customer, you can choose a community partner to receive 10% of the proceeds from your electricity bill, like the CKUA radio network. Visit parkpower.ca/CKUA to find out more. This week, Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is also brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network. So let's go and listen to one of our other great shows.
It's a conspiracy.
It's a Conspiracy is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network and happily powered by ATB.
We are a bi-weekly podcast that aims to discuss selected conspiracy theories, alternative accounts, legends, myths, and more without coloring the topic with our conversation, until the very end of the episode.
We also feature beer reviews, lame jokes, bad puns, far too many 80s movies references, geek culture, and general nerdery.
Our real aim is for fun, inclusive content that doesn't take itself too seriously.
You don't have to be blisteringly paranoid of mind control to enjoy a chin wag with your old pals, Greg, Charlie, Andrew, the Irish Madman, and our podcast puppies, Kylo and Ren.
Dave, how was that for you?
It was good. It was really Denzel, if you know what I mean.
I have to say, not to spoil the lead here too much, but this is one of those 3-hour movies that, at least for me, did not really feel like a 3-hour movie. It kind of zipped along pretty good, so I was consistently engaged. I was not looking at my watch like, I don't know, let's say message in a bottle.
Ugh, I can't believe you named it by name. That's like a curse now. You've cursed yourself.
Cursed film.
Yeah.
Let's go through some information, although, a spoiler alert, we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. So, The Hurricane was released on December 29th, 1999. So, we just squeaked in there for the year 1999. No other major releases came out that day. Currently, it is rated 7.6 on IMDb. It is rated 74 on Metacritic. And over on Rotten Tomatoes, it is rated 83% with 113 critics weighing in. And 55,622 users give it 87%. It is available on DVD or Blu-ray. And currently, you can only buy or rent it on iTunes in Canada. Its budget was $50 million. It had a very small opening before going nationwide in the year 2000. So it opened to $384,000. Domestically, it made $50 million. Internationally, $23 million. So it came in at a total of $73 million. So with inflation, $114 million. Based on the budget and what it made there, I'm going to guess that was kind of seen as not an outright failure, but kind of mid-lane. It didn't blow away the box office. The plot description is the story of Reuben Hurricane Carter, a boxer wrongly imprisoned for murder, and the people who aided in his fight to prove his innocence. It stars Denzel Washington as Reuben Carter, Vasilis Shannon as Lesra, Deborah Kara Unger as Lisa, and Liev Schreiber as Sam. Now, the machine doesn't like us talking so much about these backstories. It's the machine who didn't like that.
To be fair, I don't like anything.
So, Dave, you have very kindly, under order of the machine, I should point out very clearly, you did something this week, and we're going to alter how we do this section. Maybe you can fill us in.
So we got the machine's feedback loop told us essentially to shut the fuck up a little bit, but it did actually tell me that I then had to type things onto another computer. So
wait, with your fingers?
It's all about fingers with this robot,
wow.
Right? There's a lot of
all about it. Gets arms, now it's fingers. I don't know.
It's disgusting. And your fault.
Never forget, this is all Kyle's fault.
Yeah, all my fault.
Moving forward, we'll just kind of breeze over. Is that the kids? Mm-hmm. Is that still in the parlance? We're just gonna
probably not.
We're just gonna breeze.
Basically, from I understand it, the kids nowadays basically just shorten things. So instead of breeze over, it's probably we're gonna brio.
Yeah, we could brio it. Although that is an Italian pop, I'm pretty sure.
Is it really?
Yeah, isn't brio a soda?
I know Orangina, but that is the only
it had to be pronounced
Italian
that way.
soda that I know.
No, it's good. That's
Orangina?
Good.
I don't know. I smell like Orangina all day long. I just want to point that.
When you listen to yourself, Kyle, I hope you understand why I feel like a
Do you record yourself, Kyle? I do.
All right, let's talk about this, Kyle. How much information is too much information?
Well, what the machine actually also had us do is create a Patreon account. So what's going to happen is Dave has very kindly, and he would never say this, and I would never say it to his face, but he did an amazing job writing up some backstories to the actors. So we'll leave a link into the description below if you want to see an extended version of this. But I think what we really need to see is, as far as the actors go, I think we're in some interesting parts of their careers. Because Denzel, I would say, is kind of, midway to current day. I don't know how else to say that. He definitely was not a new face on the scene. Like, he had established himself. But Liev Schreiber, I would say, is kind of in the beginning part of his career. Like, he was not like the Liev Schreiber that we know today. He was not Ray Donovan yet, is basically what I'm trying to say. So let's just talk about Denzel, or as I think you like to call him, Zell.
Well, me and Zell go back. We've been buds. We hang out. We Zoom, right? I've got his Zoom digits. No. Passcode?
Yeah. I think that would just be a weird conversation having Denzel watching it on Zoom. Very intense. And I'd be like, I don't know what to say.
That would literally be the whole thing. I would just clam up because his gravitas, he wouldn't even have to say anything. Yeah. He would just look deep into the camera and everyone would
You would like bawl your eyes out. I was like, this is an amazing experience. He didn't say a thing.
Well, I'm just trying to think.
What did you know Denzel from? Like back in 1999, were you...
Virtuosity.
Did you know who Denzel Washington was? God.
Yeah, I threw that out pretty quick.
The cinematic classic Virtuosity.
Hey,
with Russell Crowe,
Russell
right?
Crowe's breakout role as a sadistic killer. I have trouble chronologically listing Denzel's films. I mean, Glory's before that. Glory's great.
Yeah.
Glory's great. And
you would have done Malcolm X by now, too, I'm pretty sure.
Is it before? Yeah, maybe.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, before 99. Yeah.
Because
Malcolm X.
really didn't get into Denzel, again, This is how white I am, until Training Day, a couple of years after this came out. Like, that's really like my introduction to like Denzel Washington.
Well, Training Day is great. And for me, that was an exciting film because it was the first time he was a bad guy. Did I use N? That he was going to be a bad guy. And I was a big Ethan Hawke fan, although that is probably, as I'll write down, the beginning of the end of Pretty Ethan Hawke. He looks so strung out in that movie.
I mean, not that this is an Ethan Hawke podcast, but what a weird career he's had. Anyways, that's
he's also an amazing actor. But
yeah, he is when he wants to be. And then
he
like takes 5 awful movies that no one wants to watch, and then comes back.
Speaking of which, I watched The Courier. and it had Gary Oldman in it. So,
there you go.
Talk about weird careers. Anyways,
and I've also seen him, I should say, in the Kenneth Branagh Shakespeare movie, Much Ado About Nothing. Denzel Washington is also in that. So definitely I am familiar with his work. Love Denzel Washington. I think he really is one of like the great actors. I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah, he's great because like many of the great Hollywood actors, and we'll see this with my buddy Leave, is the theater background and this connection to acting as a craft and not celebrity. And I know that's a little unfair to that generation of actors. It's more of a modern issue where we're getting a lot more of this crossover of intent and career designs.
Sure.
But he's got it. Whatever it is, he's got it.
Liev Schreiber, it's bad to say, but yeah, I would say that his Sabretooth portrayal is probably that's how I kind of know. Although he's not Sabretooth in the first X-Men film. I think it was the ones after that he came on board for.
Really? I just call him Sabretooth.
Pretty sure.
Yeah.
But he used Sabretooth for a few of them, so that's how I kind of know who he is.
Just quickly on the background of this guy, he's got...
Oh my gosh.
He's got a story,
demons,
man.
Some demons in his past, yeah.
And surprisingly, although it shouldn't be, because I don't actually think he's a bad actor. I think he's a great actor. It's just when you're Sabretooth, it's hard to get away from such an iconic role.
Mm-hmm. I think he's a pretty like tall and like big
hunky
guy.
Dude, yeah.
I think it's harder than most people realize to pull off being like a normal guy on film. Some people try and do it, like Tom Cruise, and he's never going to be like a normal guy. Like, you know what I mean? Where Liev Schreiber can almost like blend into the background so well and be like, oh yeah, this is like some guy run into like on a Toronto street. And I could totally believe that this is some guy I could run onto a street, where a lot of actors can't, I don't think, pull it off. They can do big characters and like magical characters, but being small and very intentional with your movements and stuff, I think that's actually a really hard skill to master for film specifically. And you can tell that because anytime you film someone say act natural, everyone doesn't know what to do with their hands and they feel like really awkward.
Yeah.
How am I doing this? Yeah.
I spend most of my, well, not anymore, but many of my energies behind the camera. But I get weird when one's pointing at me because I don't know, right? Mm-hmm. The acting is an underrated craft when it's treated as a craft.
So this was written by Army Ann Bernstein and Dan Gordon, based on the book The 16th Round by Reuben Hurricane Carter and the book Lazarus and the Hurricane by Sam Chaitin and Terry Swinton. Basically, here's the long and short of it. Army Ann Bernstein has written sporadically, but basically the big ones are Windy City, Naked Hotel, and Gray Lady. But he's much more of a producer. Like, he's written some things, but basically a producer. Go into his credits, and he's got like 60-ish credits underneath the producer. So just in the 2000s, he is responsible for Bring It On, Spy Game, Open Range, Dawn of the Dead, Children of Men, and the TV show Castle. So big name in the producing game. Dan Gordon, on the other hand, has this extensive writing career that started in 1975. But in the 90s, he wrote not just Wyatt Earp, but Surf Ninjas. So go check out Surf Ninjas. And then the last credit he has on his resume is a story by credit for Rambo Last Blood.
Perfect. I mean, if you're going to round that out, you got to end on
why
Rambo.
not?
Yeah, Last Blood.
And then, of course, directed by Norman Jewison, born July 21st, 1926. He started in TV, directing episodes of The Wayne and Schuster Show, Your Hit Parade, and The Judy Garland Show. But and then in the 60s, he would start to make some comedies. And then he kind of switched his focus in the late 60s, would direct the Best Picture winner In the Heat of the Night, which unfortunately he did not win Best Director that year, though. It was one of the very few times, like pre-2000, where it split, where it was a different director in a different movie that won. It went to Mike Nichols for The Graduate. The big ones for Norman Jewison: Fiddler on the Roof, Jesus Christ Superstar, Thomas Crown Affair, Rollerball, the original Rollerball, and Moonstruck. Those are kind of his big ones. This is very much near the end of his career. He would only make 2 other movies after 1999, the last one being The Statement in 2003, that starred Michael Caine.
Michael Caine.
We can do our own trip movie if you want to. We can just go on a road trip. And
the first one's
try and do
good.
Michael Caine.
I did not watch the subsequent 1.5 hours of Michael Caine impersonation. So
There's 3 other ones if you want to get into there. Any love for Norman Jewison?
I'm just trying to think of what you listed in his thing. I mean, I've heard of all of those movies. I think I've seen at least a few of them. You know, it's a name that I recognize.
He certainly holds a place in my heart because Jesus Christ Superstar is something that I watch, not necessarily every year, but every couple of years around Easter.
I thought you were going to go rollerball, frankly. But,
yeah, I watch Rollerball every Easter, actually. It's a great movie to throw on with the fam.
James Caan, man. He's, he's rolling around in a ball. It's perfect. If there's ever a metaphor for the resurrection of Christ, it's rollerball.
James Caan.
Cyberpunk.
By the way, never watched the remake of Rollerball. It is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life.
That's for a different episode.
That's a different episode. So I know you talked about it a little bit, but why don't you go into a little bit more detail? What worked for you in this movie? Why are you positive on it?
Yeah, no, it's a great movie. Like every Denzel movie, anytime the camera's on him, it's captivating because he's got that smoldering intensity. He comes across, and I think looking through his bio, as such an intelligent actor, right? There's just something about the way he works. It's interesting though, just in reflection, how often he's just Denzel. It's
Sure.
not like he'll appear in a movie, pantomiming sort of like something else. He's just got that. He's just got that power. Especially what was interesting is how relevant and cyclical the themes of racial bias are, and how things
I feel
have
like
not
this is going to
changed.
be maybe a lengthy conversation we're going to have on this episode. But once again, current events make this seem much more prescient. And not that it wasn't important back in 1999. Well, important, I guess. I don't really like using that word. It was definitely relevant in 1999 and probably even more so here in the year 2020.
It's at least it is the same story over and over again. And when one looks briefly and topically at that history, one that apparently has existed for 400 years in the United States of America.
Yeah.
But we won't get into that too much. I thought all of the actors are reasonably good. It's a bit awkward, I think, in that I don't really understand the sort of background story of the 3 white people living in a house in Toronto.
Yeah.
Technically flipping out, but it's weird.
I just want to bring that up very briefly. Even by the end of the movie, I don't know what they do.
Yeah.
Like, I literally don't know what their job was. Like, I thought, they're just educators, but I don't think they are. Like, they're researchers or they're also lawyers. Like, I literally could not grasp how they met, like, the character of Lesra and brought him back. Like what was the relationship actually like there? And then when they focus on trying to free Hurricane, it's like, who's paying you? Like, what's going on? Like, I could not grasp like how everything like that was working.
Not that we had time, but I tried to Wikipedia the accuracy of the story, which is a fascinating research hole too.
Yes.
Who gave you internet access?
But there's really no mention of this Toronto triplet group that saved Hurricane Carter, like so directly. But even during the movie, before I'd gone down that rabbit hole, it is kind of ironic, I think, that this movie about freeing this black man wrongfully accused ends up being the responsibility of 3 white people who are just lovely souls.
Well, I mean, and that is definitely,
thing.
even again, in the 2020 context, is definitely something that you're hearing more and more pushback for the media that we consume, which is so often black stories are told from the perspective of white people. So whether that's the director here in this case, putting his lens onto this, or bringing these characters who are either an amalgamation of or did not actually really exist, who are white, they have to frame it to be like, you know what? We have to have a character here that says, hey, not all white people, just to have that said so that you can buy in. I'm like, oh, okay, some of them are actually good. They have to like couch this story of oppression with it be like, but there are some good white people. It's weird. Like when you really break that down and see how often that actually has to happen, of it like, oh, it's this black person story, but told from the white person's perspective. Like even one of the most recent Best Picture winners, Green Book, was criticized for the exact same thing. It's a black person story, but told from the white person's point of view.
This is, as we'll recall, my problem with rom-coms, all being, well, the ones that are written by men. And then generally, movies that are written by men and how they treat female characters. I mean, just even as a baseline. And then when we get into race, sexuality, identification, it just gets murkier and shittier, frankly. But if there's any off-topic good news, that at least in the indie film world, we're starting to see a shift, which is great.
Here's my woke card that I guess I have to play on this episode, Dave. But there's no reason why I'd be looking at movies from the 70s. But if I was to look at movies from the 70s, you realize, boy, there was not a whole lot of diversity behind the camera when you try and find movies to talk about. Just this year, like the year 2020, I have watched at least a dozen or so films, at least directed by women and people of color, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's becoming easier. So I hope it happens more and more often. But it's definitely taking longer than it probably should to get to that point.
I was reading, I think I've referenced it before, but that sociology, essentially book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. But the interesting salient point to this part of the conversation was the reflection on culture that Black American experiences, as they're currently identified, essentially start 400 years ago, once the slaves have been, appropriated and utilized, let's say, in that country. And so if you look at the timeline of cultural development, this, let's call it rhetoric, this thing where we wish that this had happened sooner is interesting, because in any culture, it takes a long time for these norms to settle. And so we keep repeating these little turning points. And it is kind of funny watching this movie not funny is the wrong word maybe, but sad perhaps, that in 1999, the exact same issues are happening that are spurring riots. And they had documentary footage in this film from the actual marches, which are so eerily similar to the George Floyd protests, including the juxtaposition, let's say, of the peaceful and the riots of the police response, and ultimately, sadly, from the essentially lack of, let's call it a victory. At least now, that's the other thing that stuck with me, and this is not the movie itself, is in the epilogue of this film, we get this feel-good story of how everybody that was a good person won, but there's no mention of what happens to this racial police force, judiciary, state world.
Like, was there actually any repercussions for any of these people? Probably not.
Yeah, when you Wikipedia, it's not there either. And I think that's one thing that seems to be slowly evolving, is that even though the ratio of white violence is definitely not appropriately dealt with, at least there are now charges, which is such a breath of fresh air.
But is that still interesting too? Like literally at the bare minimum is a breath of fresh air.
That's, well, imagine what happens next never mind in Canada and in the US, of course, but the First Nations people haven't even got this far. I mean, you want to talk about other problems. And then once we get into, women have a hard enough time. They've got Charter of Rights protections. They have a hard enough time just finding a space that isn't also through the lens of a man. This is a bad conversation to have on a podcast. We're going to get in trouble. The world sucks, and privileged white males are to blame, and heterosexual white males are to blame, and it's easy.
Luckily, none of those people are involved in the making of this podcast, so that's good.
That's probably why this podcast exists, Kyle.
I forced you to come onto this podcast.
Well, that's the premise. That's the premise.
I guess that's the rich fiction that we have created on this podcast called Kyle and Dave versus the Machine.
What am I even doing here?
So I guess I'll start off by just saying what I particularly liked at the very, very beginning. And I mean, like literally the very beginning of this movie, there's a message that gets portrayed on there, which is, this is based upon a true story, but some things have been like created. This is not a completely true story or something like that, to that effect.
Just quickly, do you think that was in the theatrical release, or do you think that was subsequently put on because of the controversy of the content of the film?
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I have no idea. There may be some legal reason that they have to put it there. Regardless, I actually really appreciated that. This is a really weird hill I'll die on. I think it only affects me but it makes me so irrationally angry when the first thing I see is like, this is a true story. And then they go into the movie, or this is based on a true story. I'm like, all right. Like, the only reason you're putting that little statement there is like, this is all true. And then you can go and tell your friends, like, this crazy true story I told, even though like half of it is completely made up just to make it cinematic. And it's not the fact that they're making things up. Like, I get it. You have to do that to make this a narrative. Like, this is not a documentary or a documentary series. We can take the time and like build that up. So I have no problem with them fictionalizing things. I hate it though when they lean into like, but this is 100% true that this all happened. Like, it didn't though. So I like that they did that. It was just like, listen, we're doing the basic overview of this. The bones of it. Like, this is going to be compressed and like changed, and characters are going to be amalgamated. It's that, just deal with it. And then, as I said at the beginning, it actually took me by surprise, because I just in my mind, I was like, this is probably going to be a standard like biopic where it's going to be, you know, from start to finish, we're going to see him get wrongfully accused, go to jail, blah, blah, blah. And it really wasn't that. Like, we kind of start there, and then we go back in time and forward in time and then back in time again, and then to present day, and then we go back again. I think that if maybe this was not as comfortable or as an experienced filmmaker as what Norman Jewison would have been at this point, I feel that could have been a little muddled and like hard to follow. But I think it actually made sense to do it that way. Whereas like, we need to get like really quickly into like wrongfully accused. He's in this car. He gets wrongfully accused. He's going to jail. Now let's do some backstory. Boom, back in time. And like, we kind of get up to that point. And also, by the way, there's this other character up in Canada. So, I mean, like, I think they did that all really, really well. Really, we just kind of deal with him being in there almost like going, or a little nuts behind bars, but still trying to be like very like, whatever. Actually, you know what? It reminded me of? It reminded me of you, Dave, a lot, because I found myself being like, he almost become like this Buddhist, like, when you're awake, I'm asleep. When you're asleep, I'm awake. You'll never see me break, and I'll be doing this. And it's like, when you bend, I'll bend further, whatever he says. Like, basically it's just like doing these little mantra things.
Now
like,
we heard your inner dialogue watching Denzel. That's pretty funny. When you bend. No, yeah, they really play up that, that stoic Buddhist. I mean, it's hard to label. Yes, it is a fascinating thing.
That thing, but like, just being like so pointed, like, hey, I'm going to learn about the law, and I'm going to try and fight this from the inside. And I think what was so effective, and why Denzel plays this so well, he really is the standout, I think, in this movie. You see this character being like, I'm tough. Like, I was trained on the streets. I saw horrible things happen to the people I was growing up with. My father was not the best father in the world. I went to war. I was trained as a military officer to be kind of, let's face it, an asshole. Became a boxer so I could be an even bigger asshole. And then using that, coming into prison and being like, I'm going to take all this energy. I'm going to get out by my sheer force of will, and being like beat down, almost to the point of giving up. Like, you almost see that moment where he basically says like, there's no hope for me. I am going to die here in prison. And then realizing, hey, no, I might have one more round in me, and like fighting it until you get to that last scene, which I love, which is like, let's go for it. We got this far. Let's do our Hailmaker and see if it's enough to get free. So all that really worked for me. I thought that journey was good. And, I made an exclamation at the beginning about this being a 3-hour movie. I think it almost needs to be. You need to feel that he is behind bars for so long for something that he did not do. So to try and get through that quickly, I think would be wrong. You need to feel like him hitting the wall. And it's like, is this going to be it? Is this going to be enough to get him out of here? So I think all of that was like super effective for me.
I agree on most points. The thing that stuck out to me a little bit, the one is a bit of a critique. The intent at the beginning for sure was to kind of structure this thing to show that he is not a good-ish person prior to having his spiritual awakening at the third or fourth stint, like after getting life. But even in that little bar altercation when he meets his first or wife or whatever, he comes off a little too intelligent to play this burly, raging boxing guy. It felt like he was already up. So I had a little bit of trouble kind of getting into this idea of a character change for him. It felt like he was kind of, we used the parlance, woke from the get-go, which I had a hard time kind of bringing back. Secondly, I thought it was a little weird I agree with you. I think the ideas for the movie, not to drag on, but to be full so that we can understand him surviving, essentially getting beat down over and over again, persevering until he's freed. But his fights are all depicted as first round, just brutal victories.
Yeah, which is not the case.
Which is a little weird too, right? Like, and he's not even
especially
scratched.
when you see, I think they even in the movie say what his record was.
Yeah.
It's like, well, he won, I forget, 19 but lost 12 or something. I'm like, oh, well, I mean, that's not like the greatest record
yeah,
in the world.
It would have been interesting, perhaps, to show him as, like on his way, perhaps of getting a shot, but getting his ass whipped and always getting back up. I mean, that's become a bit of a trope and a bit of a cliche now. I just rewatched Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is maybe my favorite movie now. But that's a theme in it. But so that part was a little off for me. And then from a directing perspective, I thought it was a little confusing to put the fight scenes only in black and white, but all of the other era-specific pasts were in color. And it felt a little bit, I don't know if it's supposed to be homage to Raging Bull. I don't know why the decision was made. Maybe it's supposed to reflect the archival television footage that maybe they based some of these fights. But it was hard for me to kind of, when they start doing that temporal shift, jump cuts, to keep even the fights separate. At one point he's fighting a black champion. At one point he's fighting a white champion. It's like, how many title shots, how many champions, how many, like it just started getting a little hard in the middle for me to keep up with, I think the opening thing he's beating, I don't know the champion's name, but it's a black fighter. And then it looks like he's arrested that night. But then later they cut to the fight with the white fighter where he's robbed because of racial bias. And it feels like the murder happens that night because they jump to another sort of depiction of the night that he's wrongfully accused. So there were like little things like that. I mean, it doesn't really reflect on the movie as a whole, but it is a little bit weird. And then for me, the final resolution, and this is kind of to your description, it felt a little rushed. So we've suffered and seen him suffer, and it's incredible. And he's got that great, almost Shakespearean little madness in the hole where he's talking to himself, and you see, this psychoanalysis of his near first emotional break. I love the scene where he's telling his wife that she's got to separate because he can't have hope because it'll drive him. Like, that stuff is so powerful and poignant. But then at the end, after these 3 white angels show up, it's like, okay, you got a trial. Had a beautiful moment with the young black man, and now he's done. Movie's over. Here's an epilogue. Everybody's high-fiving each other.
I mean, that's basically where most of my criticisms happen, is actually the supporting characters. Because like I said, Denzel is great in it. And I think, honestly, Vaselis, I think is the actor's name, does a pretty decent job too. But I think it's them who is the core to this movie.
Yes.
And to be brutally honest, I think you get rid of all the other characters. I don't think or at the very least, you don't need to dwell on them as much as I think that this film does. Again, I think that goes back to my thinking, like, this feels like it has to couch it in the whiteness a little bit so that we are brought along and being like, hey, there's good white people in the world, that sort of thing. Yeah, I just didn't really care about their story.
Yeah.
They're there to like get the ball rolling. I get that, but it's like, it's really still Hurricane and Vaselis' story and how they meet and how they both help each other out of where they're currently at. I also kind of hate to say this. It's not a big part of the movie, so I can kind of brush it away. But any of the flashbacks where you see Reuben Carter as a young boy, I think all the actors are bad. Like, all the kid actors are really, really bad. But they're not there for more than like 5 minutes. So
it's a different era,
a huge
too,
deal
in child acting. Like,
especially when you see another movie from 1999, like The Sixth Sense, and like, oh, whoa, kids can actually act.
Well, Haley Joel was an anomaly. I mean, it's why that movie worked, and many of Shyamalama's movies actually don't. And this is the thing for me, visually, it was jarring that sequence was shot in color. It is awkward. And they throw these weird, and it might be from the book, but how creepy was the felt like 15 minutes, but like that 3-minute thing of the pedophile old white man stroking the head. And so you get this.
And that's the thing too, is like, is that in the book? Is that actually verified? Is that why he did it? He doesn't mention that to the police. Like, I don't know. Regardless, it's like, ooh, this is going in a weird turn that I did not expect this movie to go in.
And then the Dan Hedaya, the corrupt, brutal, racist, singular anomaly, like he's like this evil, the devil in this movie. It's weird to kind of concentrate that hatred into one character and have him chase Denzel generationally. I can understand perhaps if the person he stabbed as a child was that detective, and there could have been, if you want to build a story around something like that. But, we're not going to change the story that much. So then you could easily, at least in hindsight, show the racial tension and hate in a town of racially charged white people, which is the experience of all Black Americans in the 50s. It wasn't one person who was trying to hang them. It was the entire town. So you could have a police force that are like forcing these.
Well, that's the. I mean, during your research, was that person a real person, or was that an amalgamation of people?
Well, at least in the very topical reflection, quote unquote, Wikipedia, singular names don't appear. It's not about a single, sergeant, detective, and perhaps chief by the end of the film that's targeting him and victimizing him specifically. I think and I think this is why the cause is so powerful. This is systematic racism. There's no way Reuben Carr is the only Black man that went to jail in that era.
Honestly, like that is something that has probably changed in the last 20 years. Like if I was to go into production now, if you can make a movie right now, if I was to go into production right now, I bet you think that that's how the story would fundamentally change. It's not one police officer, it's every police officer. Right. And that's what the insurmountable thing is that they've made people lie, they've made people turn testimony, they're like disappeared other people because they do not like you. And that's really hard to fight against. And again, whether it was one judge or they had to go through a few different courts or whatever it happens to be that they like shrunk down that courtroom scene, at least you feel like this even more of an expression of like, finally, like he had to fight through everything to get here. I also like there's a little bit of meta narrative. I like talking about meta narratives. Talking about Norman Jewison, I did like how the judge was played by Rod Steiger, who was in the Heat of the Night as the racist cop. So I like that there's this like kind of like neat little bookends to like the major points of his career, where you start with racist cop and then same actor playing like kindly old judge is like, let's hear it, I'm going to allow this, and then like basically goes from there.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know that particular fact, but like bringing it up that way, I often wonder, kind of like, I can't remember what that conspiracy theory principle is where we just connect too many dots, but I wonder if there's intent.
It's called English degrees, Dave.
It's like the Farsi principle or something. I can't remember what it's called, but is that an intent to bookend his treatise on, white privilege, or was he just friends with this actor who looks like a judge now, right? I don't know. I mean, he looks like a judge. If you had to draw a caricature of a judge in the 1980s, it's going to be a bulldog, bald man. It's going to be white, right? And you need someone who looks like him because there needs to be this tension in the scene where you're not sure if he's going to give a shit, right? Mm-hmm. And Denzel's great little soliloquy appealing to justice rather than the law. I mean, I don't even know if that really happened, but it's a great little thing to push this otherwise racist looking old man to examine himself. Because, at the beginning of that trial...
You sir look like a racist. You're hired.
I say that a lot. A lot. No, but all of that to say, I mean, by the end of the movie, it's great. I didn't really feel like, I think you brought up in the movie, that I'd lost 3 hours of my life. I felt like I was involved in the whole story. I could see why, ultimately, this was released in December 29th, because they're definitely Oscar baiting, and B, that Denzel would get nominated for this movie because he's incredible in it.
Did not win, but he was definitely nominated.
Who won that for that year?
I believe it was Michael Caine for The Cider House Rules.
Really?
I'm pretty sure. Which, who knows if we're going to be able to watch that movie, but I've been told by a lot of people that it is not good. So, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, if you want to talk about a white privilege patriarchy, you're going to give Michael Caine an Oscar, and Denzel for this film gets the standby. That's a fascinating thought.
I mean, I am 100% convinced if this was not Denzel Washington, my eyes would have rolled so far up into the back of my head. But it somehow moved me where he says, like, hate put me in prison, love is going to bust me out. Yeah, which would be like the pull quote on the poster. But it's like, I don't know. It's all great and worked for me 100%. Some things I wrote down while watching this, which is, it seemed like every character actor from The Sopranos was in like the first 10 minutes of this movie. I'm like, what is going on? What is happening? It was like they were in this movie and then they all got cast for The Sopranos later on in that year when it debuted. Anyways, you know how I knew this was Toronto they were filming in? They were drinking bagged milk. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is Toronto.
I love that.
Can you explain the whole bagged milk thing out east?
Can you explain why you don't put milk in bags out west? No, I think it's only Ontario. I remember reading it has something to do with, who knows, maybe a cow lobby. It wasn't even the milkers. It was the cows that got together. And they're just like, look, it comes from an udder, right? It's in a bag to start.
They basically held a vote. They unionized.
All those in favor, moo.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you this. I prefer cartons. When you use bagged milk, if you do it correctly, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
If you make one mistake on the cut or the placement into the jug, and it's a messy life. It's things happen with bags.
I don't have time for that. I just don't have time for that. Just give me my good old carton. Show me the lost kid I don't care about, and I'll drink my milk. I'll drink my cow juice.
It might be cheaper to own milk in Ontario. I don't remember actually the unit price.
What do you mean cheaper to own milk?
You know, like
to buy milk? Is that what you mean?
You pay more for the carton packaging. That might be part of it too.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It's not, you phrase it in such a weird way. There's like, you know, like how you own a house. It's like when you own milk. I'm like, what do you mean when you own milk? I have to buy a share in this local co-op in order to get milk delivered to my house.
You know, as somebody who comes from a farm town, I'm surprised you don't own a milking cow.
Have you ever milked a cow?
No, I've never touched the teat
of an udder. Yeah, I have. Just FYI, I have milked a cow before.
And how did that go?
It got messy too.
was it enjoyable for both you and the cow?
She said she loved it. So I mean, I can only go by what they told me.
You got a good stream. You got a good thick stream.
I will tell you this: we have also barn cats. And boy, do they come out of the woodwork when you start milking cows. Because they're like, ooh, can I get some? Can I get some? I was also going to tell you, too, like I mentioned the Bob Dylan song, but it does kind of form the backbone of this movie. There's like 3 or 4 separate times that it plays like a verse of what's going on, which in a way is like a little like too on the nose for me in some ways.
Yeah.
But like I like the song, too. So it was kind of like a pro and con at the same time.
Did you catch when he's in, speaking of Malcolm X, I could be wrong, but I felt like the Malcolm X poster was actually of Denzel Washington.
Oh, really? Oh, I don't know.
Malcolm X.
I didn't see.
Because I've been watching some Malcolm X debates and interviews, and I don't know, when it panned, and it's very, like, it's not meant to be something in the foreground of that shot, but my immediate intuition was like, wait, I think that's Denzel as Malcolm X, but I didn't.
That'd be cool if it was.
My favorite shot, although there were a couple, was the pan out as the visitors are leaving the first time in the and it's only black inmates turning over their shoulder, staring at the camera. That was a pretty powerful moment there too.
Yeah, I think this movie is at its best when it doesn't try to become like super didactic in what it's trying to say. When it just lets the scenes play out and like visually, hey, like you should be noticing what's going on. One of my favorite ones, honestly, was like when he's at the bar and there's like, I think that white reporter is talking to him. And he's like, why aren't you down at the protests? It's like, oh, you're right. I should go. You want to come?
Yeah.
And they're like, the white reporter's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Like, he can't, like, why would I go there type of thing. So I think that when it was like pointed like that, where it's not like being like beating you over the head super, super much, it's that was when it was at its best.
I think that was also a great little thing that plays well into right now with all of the woke shaming that we live in. Mm-hmm. But I love the sarcastic reply where it's like, well, we'll go out. I could probably kill 4 of them before they get me, right? And it's like this. It was I thought it was a great little moment where he's kind of aware of what's going around on a wider scale. It does show a little bit of his self-interest too, but I thought that was kind of the whole thing played really interesting for me. It made me think a lot.
I guess, I mean, I started this off by saying I like that little message at the beginning, but do you think that it does lose anything at all if they are making up certain things to fit the narrative that they want to project to you? Like, does that matter to you, I guess, at the end of the day?
Well, that becomes more of a academic or philosophical discussion about movies in general. So should a movie, I mean, I talk about this a lot, or in my head about photography, but should a movie exist for the audience, for the story, or for the director? And they're not necessarily a separate Venn diagram circles, but, you know, a movie like this where the base narrative being this true example of, you know, racial bias, suffering, 20, 30 lost years. Do you need to tell that story in a way that a predominantly white paying audience is going to give a shit about? And in that case, do you need to make these edits to reality to keep it relevant? Or do you go the other way and try to, like you brought up, make it a documentary series? Or play to a niche audience, an indie audience, although with a $50 million budget. I mean, I think we can imply that the studio has a big say too, to ensure that they're trying to get at least $50 million back. Oscar nominating performances aside, I think there's a lot of texture to that question. I don't know. If I want to just watch this movie for the sake, if listeners are wanting to watch this movie for the sake of just watching a good movie, then it's fine. But if you're watching it with especially right now, with all of the deeper sociological contexts, it might be a little hypocritical almost. The whole movie, if you do the background story of actually the hurricane, it's a lot more real than in the movie. He's not a white knight. Pardon the expression. Yeah, he's got quite a troubled life before he ends up in prison. It's kind of a fascinating thing about reality. It's not meant to actually be like a movie, is it, Kyle? Yeah. That's why we like movies so much.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like when it gets into these like life stories, trying to shove it into like a single film is almost like impossible. And I'm normally pretty negative on biopics anyways. It's like I would rather you make a 4-episode miniseries just so you can go in and provide that context, rather than try and like compress it down into something that's a little bit more palatable. But again, that's just me. That also doesn't bring back the money to the investors and stuff like that either.
That's the thing, you know, the problem in the capitalist world we live in, Kyle, is that not only do you only get the big budget for features that they project will get you a big return, but I remember a long time ago I was talking to a friend about downloading movies illegally, because I used to torrent and all that stuff. I don't know if it's still called torrenting, but what happened was I got caught. So I was downloading, I think I had a modified PS2. So I was downloading games and movies and all this stuff. And I was trying to get Okami. That was a pretty cool game back in the day. For all the people that are old, that's a pretty cool, game. But while it was taking so long, I downloaded Lego Star Wars, I think, or something that had to do with Disney or Star Wars. And the moment that fucking game downloaded, I got an email from Lucasfilms through my internet's, my ISP, saying that I had been in breach and all this stuff. And I made up, I was frightened, so I made up some story about somebody else.
Then you called up your ISP and said, "You fucking narc," and then slammed the phone down.
So then I took this moral position, as you know, I always do. And several years later, I was talking to a friend who still torrented. And I was like, the classic argument, like, if you get this for free, the artists don't get any money. And then he goes, well, we go to the concerts because they get more money from the concert than they do from the record label. And I said, when's the last time you went to a concert?
You went to a concert?
Right?
Yeah.
So, ideally we can make documentaries, but when's the last time people went and paid for a documentary? I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you that. Yeah.
Like, unless your name was Michael Moore in the year 2003 or whenever that came out. Like nobody. Literally nobody.
Yeah. He had one or two, and then nobody gave a shit about his movies after that. Right?
That's what I mean. Like, you have to be like a huge provocateur, or you do your murder mystery or your Tiger King thing on Netflix, and hopefully you get lightning in a bottle.
Well, that's the thing, though. It's like, if it's not on Netflix, who's going to the theater to watch Tiger King? Nobody.
No one.
That movie doesn't get a distribution at all. It doesn't even get made.
Well, and again, that would be a 2-hour version of Tiger King. Like, no one's going to go and see that.
Starring,
right?
If it was Tom Cruise, maybe. He's like,
Tiger Cruise is the Tiger King.
He's like actually wrestling a tiger.
Well, I was going to say, he would literally go in and wrestle tigers and then jump out of a plane and be like, I'm crazy.
Yeah.
And like, That's how.
He could pull off a mullet, though. I'll tell you that, if anybody could.
We're done here.
The machine has told us that we do need to wrap up here. I guess before we get into some of our other stuff, we watched this because the machine told us to. Do you think anyone in 20 more years from now is actually going to come back and watch this movie?
Yeah. It's cyclical because we're not at the stage where it doesn't matter. And whether the directing style and some of these little nuances we pick up now, whether we imply too much with our current experiences, you can show this movie to any of the woke culture and people will still get upset because when they realize that the exact same things we're going through right now that seem so revolutionary have not only been happening 20 years ago, but 20 years before that and 20 years before that. Like some of the archival footage of civil rights protesters, like 50s, 30s, like Kyle, it's this type of movie will always have cultural relevance until we don't see color. And fuck, is that going to happen?
No. Although what I've been reading is that in itself is stupid to not see color. We should be celebrating people's backgrounds. But I think you're right insofar as, especially with Denzel being still considered cool. At least that's my sense, is that Denzel is still conceived to be cool. I think that there is going to be an appetite for this movie. You're right, it's cyclical. My sense is, because it already is starting to feel a little bit cute as far as like the filmmaking style. Like it's like, oh, that's charming. You know, the filmmaking style. This is not how this movie would look if it was made today. Not that it can be, of course. It was made 20 years ago. But I feel like it's like in 1999, how we looked at films from like the early 70s. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool, I guess, is what it's going to feel like in another 20 years. Like, oh, okay, like that's an old film I'm looking at just because of how the shots are made.
It's not AR.
Yeah, correct. It's I can't smell the musk that's coming off from the people. So this is bullshit. I don't want to watch it.
I mean, they don't do solitary confinement anymore because people go insane. But I felt like that was actually, I didn't actually look this up, but I did a trip to Alcatraz when I was in San Francisco, maybe 10, 15 years ago. Man, if you want to, like, there are so many different places in the world where you get that visceral experience, but Alcatraz is a really, really creepy one. And I couldn't help but feel like, even though the penal system
whoa, hey now,
in America,
this is a family show,
are always depicted this way because their prisons are fucking disgusting. It gave me this Alcatraz moment. There's just so much concrete and so much hell. It reminded me of walking through that prison and seeing the same thing, like these group gates and these fucking disgusting, I don't know what they were, like 3x3 cells. And it's a frightening experience to go. I mean, jail in any country is not going to be any joke, but the American depiction of prison is harrowing. Can I use that word? That's what kids still say, right? Yeah. Hashtag, can we hashtag harrowing?
Harrowing. They call it hair now. It's like, that's so hair.
Yeah.
Let's get into our rating here. This is, of course, where we rate the movie out of 5 each and then, average it together to put onto our big old list that you can go find on our Letterboxd page, letterboxd.com/KDVSTM. KDVSTM is also where you can see us on Twitter or Instagram. And if you ever want to send us an email, please do. You can do that at the longest email address ever made, which is kyleanddavevsthemachine@gmail.com. Dave, out of 5, what would you rate The Hurricane?
All of our cultural discussion aside, I'm just trying to think. I'm hovering between.
Are you clicking a pen over there?
Yeah, can you hear it?
I can.
It's not even
you
clicking.
You son of a bitch. You're trying to ruin this recording. To fully fill in people is like the first time I met Dave, we recorded the podcast and he clicked a pen through the entire thing and they didn't pick up on it somehow. And then that's all you could hear in that recording is click, click, click.
It was a pretty good conversation for first podcast too. And the recording is not a reflection of Media Lab YYC. We'll just
how you got Denzel to be on that first show, I'll never know. But.
Well, me and Zell go way back.
Anyways, out of 5, what would you rate The Hurricane?
I'm hovering between a 3.5 and a 4. I'm going to go for a 4 just because I love Denzel. I don't know.
Well, I also gave it a 4.
Oh, shit.
So
we're supposed to disagree more. Why can't we be more disagreeable? We'll just keep watching South Park.
You woke bitch. This is a 1 if I've ever seen one. No. Okay, so it's tied with a bunch of stuff here then, is what that means. So we have to figure this out. What it's tied with is Toy Story 2, 10 Things I Hate About You, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Go. Those are the films that it's tied with. What are you sensing there? I did that from top to bottom. So do you feel it fits in between a couple of those movies, bottom, top?
No, I think it's, you know what? I think it's the top of that group. I would probably, it's hard to rewatch dramas of this nature, but I would put it above Toy Story 2 in my mind. So I think it has more relevance than that list.
Depending on the day, I'd flip that around, but I'm not so incensed that I would. I'm going to disagree with that.
Intuition?
So let's do that.
Like, would you put something else in front of it, or are you saying that you would put it at the bottom of the list?
No, what I'm saying is that I don't know if I'd put it above Toy Story 2 or below Toy Story 2.
Yeah.
It just depends on the day.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair to this list that we're creating, I think I fluctuate every week between like favorite versus best movies sometimes, because by far I would probably watch 10 Things I Hate About You more times than I'll ever probably watch The Hurricane ever again in my life. But I love The Hurricane. It's a great film. So I have to, put it in here the way that I see fit. That being said, that means that The Hurricane is going to enter our list at the number 7 position. So if you want to see what our top 10 is looking like right now, go over onto our Letterboxd page. Dave, let's find out what we are doing next week. Let me push this button. Oh, Dave, we're doing another foreign film. Well, international film, I guess, is the more PC term nowadays. We're going to be watching Run, Lola, Run next week.
Sweet.
That's a great movie.
Yeah.
I've seen that now. I've seen that countless times. So
me too. Although, when's the last time you watched it?
A decade ago, probably.
Yeah. I hope it holds up because
I watched it a ton during university. Like I watched it multiple times.
It's such a university.
It's a very university film.
Yeah.
Red hair girl, she's cool.
And
told from 3 multiple perspectives. Oh my god. Yeah. It's like you know what it is? Now that I've been rewatching Kurosawa, this is basically like my first Rashomon movie that I'm watching. Like 3 perspectives? How could you totally think about that thing? And he's just ripping off somebody from like 30, 40 years before that.
We'll find out. Is he ripping off? Is it an homage? Is it a new take? There's so many different ways to...
I have heard that it is a ripoff if the movie's in color, but if it's in black and white, then it's an homage. That's the...
Maybe that's why Norman Jewison left the 3 boxing scenes in black and white, just to settle the debate.
Well, talking about that, I'm just going to put on these gloves here again. I'm going to keep sparring on our middleweight champion here.
Just keep it above the belt, robot. Just keep it above the belt.
It's trying to punch me in the face.